Reading with your kids.
Hola, niho, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so happy and so honored that you join us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show, and please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is filmmaker Denise Soler Cox. She is here to help us kick off Hispanic Heritage Month with a discussion about her film, Being Eñye. Before we invite Denise into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Dear Libby, where you answer my questions about friendship. Written by Libby Kisner. Is your child lonely? A recent study of over 2,000 people aged 12 to 18 found that teens who experience loneliness are at a greater risk of leaving school with lower grades than young people who don't feel lonely. The findings also suggest that without the right support, loneliness can increase their risk of developing other problems, including mental health difficulties. And Dear Libby, will you answer my questions about friendship? Trusted 15-year columnist Libby Kisner offers a breakthrough approach to friendship. This hands-on guide for dealing with everyday friendship struggles faced by teens today will help guide your child towards flourishing friendships and vibrant self-expression in every stage of life, and is a book to be read and reread at any age. Get your copy today. Dear Libby, will you answer my questions about friendship? By Libby Kisner. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by The Antidotes Pollution Solution, written by Dr. Patty Michelle. Hey, Dr. Patty Michelle is a writer and public health specialist who combines her passion for women, technology, science, and the world to inspire women and girls through her writing. That inspiration can be found in her new middle grade novel, The Antidotes Pollution Solution. Just when a group of fifth grade friends is returning to normal life and to school after a global pandemic, the waters of the Chesapeake Bay have become polluted by a plastic-eating bacteria experiment gone wrong, and both fish and kids are getting sick. The Antidotes race against the clock to get the word to kids around the country about how to stay safe. But will the Antidotes be able to get enough kids to achieve zero plastic use before it makes any more fish or children sick? Join the Antidotes in their first science adventure and stay tuned for more stories to come. Get your copy today, The Antidotes Pollution Solution by Dr. Patty Michelle. Join us right now. It's kind of like having family on the podcast. I'm so excited. Our guest today is the driving force behind a beautiful film and a movement. It's called Being Eñye. Please welcome to the show, Denise Soler Cox. Hey, Denise, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great, Jed. So nice to meet you, and thanks for having me on.
It's so nice to meet you, too. I refer that Denise is family. Denise is part of my extremely extended family. She's a cousin of one of my beautiful wife. But, you know, that's one of the things that I have really embraced since I got married, this idea that family extends beyond DNA. That it's people that we choose to invite into our lives and call family and embrace as family. And certainly everybody on my wife's side of the family is part of that beautiful embrace. And so I welcome you to my family now. So I'm excited to have you on.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I had a chance to watch Being Eñye. It's a great film. Tell us, what does Being Eñye mean?
So when I first made the film, it was inspired by a moment that I had with a bunch of friends at a bar in Miami that was very nondescript and not special at all, except for the fact that the quality of the conversation was probably the richest that I'd ever been in regards to my identity as a Latina, as a Puerto Rican woman, feeling very much caught between two worlds. There's a saying, ni de aquí, ni de allá. I don't feel like I'm from here or from there. I grew up in New York, and my family is from Puerto Rico, and never felt quite American enough or Puerto Rican enough. And I really believe that that was my experience and my experience only. And that is because there was no internet and like YouTube and podcast. I mean, like there just wasn't a world where people were exchanging ideas and sharing about things like this when I grew up in the 70s and 80s in New York. And so when we began talking about things, mostly funny things, like how our parents pronounce things, like my parents would pronounce expressway, expressway, or we would, we were saying like, what about, the wind, that thing called the wind. I can't even say it right. The windshield or the wind chill factor, right? My parents actually called it the windshield factor. So I remember asking my parents, like, what does this have to do with our windshield in the car? And so we would so that night we were trading stories like this, and they were so funny. And then things got more serious, and we started talking about that feeling of not belonging or feeling outside of both cultures that we were a part of. And I had this aha moment, and that was that I was actually a part of something bigger, and that my loneliness that I felt all my life that I couldn't even put words to, actually, I had that shared experience with other people. And I really sincerely couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that other people shared this level of pain and challenge around my identity as a Latina. And something crazy was infused into me that night that I needed to make sure that as many other people could know the truth, that they weren't alone. And I was the person that was going to tell them. And so that night I decided to make a movie. And the movie turned out to be Being Eñye. But the interesting thing, or the noteworthy thing is I was 26, had no training in being a filmmaker, didn't even know a filmmaker. And actually, because I didn't feel secure and strong enough in my identity, I put the project off for 17 years. So for 17 years, I just felt, I didn't know how, but really I was grappling with my enoughness, I say. Like I felt like I wasn't Latina enough. My Spanish wasn't good enough. Like I just could invent a infinite list of reasons why I wasn't the person to make this movie, until one day I just got sick of myself making excuses. And I just said, okay, I'm going to try. I'm going to give it everything I have over the course of 1 year. And if I don't I called it significant progress, then I'll drop it. But I'm going to try like hell to try to get this done. And luckily I ended up meeting my creative partner to this day. And a few years later, we released the film. And in 2016, the film was released. And so Being Eñye really has come to mean someone who feels like it's a love letter to first gens, first gen Latinos, but really first gen anything. When you feel like you're new to a situation. And so the relatability has, I would say, gone up exponentially. So now people that are part of the diaspora, part of any diaspora, can relate to the story, because being first gen, being new to a country, having to understand the customs, the stories, just plain old the food, the smells, the nuance. Even though first gens were born here, we still need to learn how to be versed in those things and come from homes that are very much from the old country. Does that help answer that question? I know I just said it home.
Absolutely. And as you were speaking, my beautiful wife and I haven't really talked about this and that feeling of being Enye, but I witnessed it not long ago. We were just down in Puerto Rico, and we got off the plane and we went over to Harry's house.
It's so cool.
And then we went to a funeral.
Oh my gosh.
And as I was watching, my wife's family with meeting, these family members that she hasn't seen for years, and they absolutely adore her and love her. And she was overwhelmed. We just got off the plane and then dinner with her, dear best cousin and, friend, and then to a funeral and then meeting these people. But you could see what you were talking about. Like, I'm part of this, but I'm not really part of this. And, you know, I saw that. My daughter was with me, and we saw that for her, and we felt for her. And I mean, I'm just feeling it now. We felt really bad for her. And, you know, it was a beautiful thing. And so I think that's something that she also is first generation. It's something that she definitely has experienced and probably hasn't talked enough about. She hasn't had the chance to have that conversation that you had back in Miami.
Mm-hmm. And also, to be honest, maybe she hasn't had a chance to have, I mean, I've been now in thousands of conversations about this, and the biggest gift of all of this, for me has been, an ability to heal. And that tension that you're talking about, that tension that was palpable that you and your daughter felt in Puerto Rico, this is a tension that so many people live an entire lifetime with, and not having an outlet or a way into the conversation. So a lot of people use the film as a tool, as a way in. And then we get to explore all these different ideas and slowly but surely heal all these pieces and parts of ourselves that don't have a place. You know, like when we organize like a kitchen, like, you know, take everything out of the pantry and then throw out what doesn't work and leave in, but all the cans are going to go here, all this goes there. It gives you a chance to reorganize. But if you don't have that chance, you live with the tension, and the tension feels like not belonging. Mm-hmm. And that is heartbreaking. And that's what I'm guessing you felt, with your wife, is like that. I don't know where I fit, you know?
That's, you hit the nail on the head. It's, you know, I love these people. I've always loved these people, but I don't know if I fit here. Mm-hmm. You know, and you could kind of see it in her eyes and feel it, you know, when we were driving back to the Airbnb that night. And, wow, I didn't expect that.
It gets really deep, right? It's interesting. Like once you start examining these things, and it's deeply personal. A lot of people, I always say, like, this is for Latinos. This is people that, you know, for people who are married to us, who are besties with us, who work with us, who are neighbors with us, you know, people who love us. And because then there's compassion. Like, I had no idea, you know, and then there's a bridge that's made. And I think that that's super important for people. I always say out of the community to participate in the conversation and watching the film and the discussion, because you know, with empathy, so many more things are possible, and compassion, and being able to, you know, understand even just a little what that must feel like, right? Because I think as human beings, we all have an experience of not belonging, and that's what makes this relatable for all, right? Mm-hmm. And what's cool about having made a movie very specifically about Latinos and first gen is that, through that very specific story, we can understand the universal experience of belonging and what it feels like not to belong. Mm-hmm. And then we have a fighting chance at creating belonging and being in the conversation, like what would make everybody feel like they belong. Because I feel like that should be the right of all human beings, right, to experience that sense like, no, this is my place, and wherever I am is where I belong. That's very aspirational, mm-hmm. But it's something that occupies a lot of my work, is around that question, like how does that get created? Because I want to be a part of that.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, and I'm glad that it was a feeling that I got from watching the film, because one of the things that we've talked about here on the Reading with Your Kids podcast a lot is that feeling of not belonging that so many kids experience from all different cultures and races. And I've said this on the podcast. I remember being with my son when he was in middle school and driving the van and having all his buddies in the car. And every one of those buddies was trying so hard to let everybody know that they had it going on and they understood exactly. And none of them knew anything. And they were all just, you know, pretending. Mm-hmm. And I think at one point I just said to him, I goes, guys, will you stop? You're all in the same boat. Just embrace the fact that you're all in the same boat and just stop trying to impress each other. It's, you know.
Well, I feel like they learn that from us. Like, mm-hmm. they see their adult family, they see their they see adults acting like that, all that pretense, and it really just all comes from fear. Like, you're not going to love me, or I'm going to lose love. Right. So that just reminds me of my husband. A lot of the work I do out in the world is speaking. And so he's like, there's two different Denises, and I default to, I want everyone to like me, Denise, and I'll be very facts and figures-ish and more official and formal. That's the one that's desperate to be accepted. But the one that needs to come out, the one that transforms lives, the one that you saw in the film, that's me. That's how I am with my family. Not trying to impress, but just, fully me, right? And that's what's oftentimes hardest for people to get back to, because we feel like that's where we get rejected, especially in schools. Unfortunately, everyone's got a story about that, but it's interesting to see and to constantly be wondering, what's the most authentic version of me? And, and to always be bringing that version, however risky it might be,
Yeah. You mentioned that it took you 17 years from the time that brainstorm to actually get working on the film. What was it that gave you I know the drive was there, the passion was there, but there also had to be some courage. Where did you get the courage to actually say, all right, it's time for me to get out there and do this and show the world that I'm a filmmaker, even though I don't think I'm a filmmaker?
Yeah. So what happened was, I'm very type A when it comes to my goals and what I want to accomplish. And so for someone like me to just keep talking about something and not doing something about it, was very off brand. Like, if I say I'm going to do something, chances are it's like, watch out world, Denise is on a mission, right? But when it came to this was like, wow, if I really do this and it doesn't work out, then I failed at the one thing that I really, really want to do. And so in many ways, this didn't happen consciously. I only understand it looking back. But what I realized is that it kind of stayed pure in my mind, untouched, no ability to fail. If I don't ever really do it, then I can't really fail at not do, I can't fail at having done it. Right. But on January 1st of this particular year, I think it was 2014, I was writing my goals down, and every year I would write one goal around this movie, and it was just make movie. And I was so mortified this last time that I wrote it, the 17th time, at myself, because I'm like, I am just full of it. Like, if I was talking to me out in the world, I'd be like, let's just, let's call a spade a spade. You say you want to do it, but you're never going to do it, right? And I had a reckoning with myself. Mm-hmm. And I realized, if I don't do this, then I never get to enjoy, having tried. Mm-hmm. And I just realized that would cost me more than keeping this perfect picture of something that could never be destroyed because I didn't even attempt to do it. Mm-hmm. And so that movie, We Bought a Zoo, was, love that movie. There's a scene in that movie, and I think I always misquote it, but there's a scene where this young kid is getting advice from, what's his name? Matt something or other. And he says, sometimes you just need 13 seconds of courage, or 16 seconds or 20 seconds of courage, or something like that. So I knew the next door neighbor of my now creative partner, who is an Oscar nominee, who's very successful, and was really the only person I knew that could potentially help me get to the next step. Not even make it with me, but just get to the next step. And so I called his next door neighbor, who was my friend, Claire, and I said, hey, can I have your neighbor's information? I want to talk to him about my film and pitch the idea. And she gave me his information. I set an appointment, and I summoned 15 seconds or whatever of courage to get that appointment. And then I strung that with another bit of courage to pitch the idea like I'd never pitched an idea in my life. And I literally just strung a bunch of, I would say, courageous moments together, moments that I had to take a lot of deep breaths and sometimes even cry before or after, until he agreed to make it with me. And that was a full year and a half later. Mm-hmm. And then we made it. And then, there's been a million more moments where I felt terrified, that the film has presented me with: stages, places, invitations. There's been so many things that have been so scary for me, but one thing about courage is that the more record, the more memory you have of being courageous, the more courageous you can be. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And so so that's how that happened.
Well, you know, one of the things that I got from the film is that you had to summon that courage, but there are a lot of other sacrifices you made. I mean, there was one scene in the film when you are selling your wedding rings to keep going. That's incredible. Just that the passion and the drive that would permit you to do that is just it's hard to imagine.
Yeah, I almost can't believe it myself, and I keep forgetting to put it on because my husband and I literally just got brand new rings just a few months ago, and he wears his to sleep. He wears his all the time, and I take mine off from time to time, and I forgot to put it on this morning, but we have our rings again. And when we got our rings, again, we went to lunch, and I was like, you know, it was my idea to do it because we really needed the money, and I knew that we could make enough money to just hold on for a few more months, financially while I made it. And, you know, it's incredible to have a partner, a husband, a spouse that believes in me so much that he would go along with something like that. And it really speaks to how, committed I was at the time. I definitely was not listening to my head. In fact, I felt very much like a failure the day that we went to the different pawn shops. We went to about 2 or 3 different pawn shops and finally ended up going to another place that buys and sells gold. And I can't tell you what a failure I felt like that day, but I was listening to something bigger is the only explanation I have. I was being guided by something so much bigger than even feeling like a failure. And I'll tell you, it paid off and it continues to. I mean, I was just invited to speak to a bunch of students in England who are part of a class that uses my film to teach about the diaspora of the Caribbean. I mean, people from all over the world contact me now saying that my story is their story and that they didn't know that anyone else felt like that. And so, you know, the price of the rings was nominal, and really the benefit of having sold them, again, I feel like came to me in realizing that my marriage was way more than just two pieces of jewelry, right? And that I had a chance to build a relationship on top of my husband believing in me so much and me never being willing to let him down. Like, I wanted him to know, I'm going to make this sacrifice you made with me. I'm going to make it so that you never regret it, you know? And another thing in the film that isn't so clear is that we also had, our car repoed, and, that was also mortifying, and that happened after the rings. So it was like one thing after the next. And this is after being very successful financially. So that's what was really hard about it, was we had really made it. The car that was repoed was a Mercedes. I mean, we had very much arrived, and we were enjoying the financial fruits of our labor, you know? And then I just sent us down this drain of struggle and sacrifice. But like I said, I just knew that I needed to do this, and that these things were material, but that the work that I was making was something that could really heal millions of people. And I was way more committed to that, than anything else, you know?
You know, one of the things is you're talking about the millions of people that this film and this movement can touch is a quote my father-in-law, who has since passed, but he used to say, if all the Puerto Ricans that say they're going to move back to Puerto Rico actually move back to Puerto Rico, they're going to have to build a second floor.
That's awesome.
And I think the same can be said of, my grandfather could have said that about Ireland. And so there are certain places in the world, Ireland, Puerto Rico, where there's probably Dominican Republic, that there's so many people have left their homelands and traveled to the United States, to different parts of the world. And so there is this huge community of first generators.
Yeah, you got first generators.
There you go, first generators. You know, that are out there that are feeling these feelings that you describe so beautifully in Being Eñye.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I know people are asking. It should have been the first question I asked you. Being Eñye, what does Eñye mean?
It's the extra letter in the Spanish alphabet. And so it's very much like Generation X. I'm born in the 70s. So, we got letters back then versus words like millennial. But, I had actually heard it on the radio. And when I lived in Miami, I heard this ad on the radio, like, if you love, or if you know all the words to Celia's Skimbara, but you also know Madonna's Lucky Star, you're an Enye. Like, and it just it kept going back with all the dualities, back and forth, hot dogs, arroz con habichuela, going from the diaspora to the American experience and back again. And I was like, it was like the biggest news of my adult life that I was an Enye. Like, oh my God, I have a letter. I'm a Gen X, but I'm also a Generation Enye. And then I combined that with this experience. I had a name for this now, and I had the idea for the movie, but then I had a name. And that's why I called it Being Eñye.
Wonderful, wonderful. Hey, one question I have to ask you. If your husband experienced this, and I don't know if your kids are fluent in Spanish, but I know every time I would go down with my kids who can understand Spanish, and I'm not fluent, I'm able to do my magic show in Spanish because I memorized the show, and people think I'm fluent, but I'm not. And my kids can understand. They're not confident in their speech. But every time we would go down, my family down there would turn to me and say, Jed, your children should speak Spanish. And I would answer them, please tell the people who speak Spanish back in America to teach them, because I can't.
Yeah. Yes. So, I mean, that's a huge, explosive conversation that is actually it's like the most well-intended comment with the most painful consequences. So many people have heard the same thing. And, especially first gens going back to the family and then basically people, for me, it was my mom, and I understood everything. Again, very much like your kids. But I would hear my own family being upset with my mom, because because my Spanish wasn't good enough. And so I internalized that there's something wrong with me, right? And so that kind of messes with the kid's mind and heart. And so a lot of my work is in education, helping people, helping adults, but also kids in a conversation around forgiveness to themselves for not being good enough. And the root of it is in their Spanish not being good enough. Now, the fascinating thing is some kids' Spanish is amazing and they still feel not good enough. And so actually the barometer is not in how well one speaks. There's something that gets planted. And it's in a child's mind, not in adults, we might get triggered, but then we have a second, we can talk to another adult or a therapist to tease this out. This doesn't mean what it feels like it means, but kids don't have that capacity. Kids hear, my Spanish isn't good enough, and immediately they go to, I'm not good enough. And when you hear that over and over and over again, then of course the kid they understand, but they're not going to speak because they know there's that evaluation immediately, right? And then there are people, well, why are you forgetting your roots? Or you don't speak Spanish. You're not a real Latino unless you speak Spanish. These are things that I am trudging through the muck and mud with adults right now with part of my work. Successful adults that are working in tech companies making six figures, but that feel so small because the root of their ethnic identity has been so trampled on, and they've not ever had that chance to tease this stuff out and have the conversation that kind of sparks this whole thing, which was, when do people have a chance to talk about this? Right. And the film really gives that, it's kind of like ground zero. And then you get to kind of talk about all these things and share, and it gets deeply personal. Because, what we know as adults, we carry some of these pains as children. They show up in our relationships, our interpersonal relationships, and our professional relationships. And so it's a heavy duty moment that you just extracted. And it's also something that transcends all nationalities. And so a lot of people that haven't seen the film, they'll be like, well, she's Puerto Rican, and my roots are from Chile, or Peru or Mexico. And so I'm not going to be able to relate until they see it and they realize, wait a second, this transcends nationality, because the things that I talk about in the film have nothing to do with nationality. Although Boricua forever, right? Mm-hmm. Like Boricuas from New York are going to be like, woohoo, like they're going to feel like this is for them. Mm-hmm. But the reason why it's so relatable is because it transcends nationality, and because I'm talking about these very core feelings, because there isn't a first gen out there that hasn't been told that their Spanish should be better, or that they're not a real Latino because their Spanish isn't good enough. That doesn't have that playing in their head. And the thing is, if people only knew, when saying that, they're shrinking the confidence of our children by saying that. And I don't think any adult out there would want to shrink their child's confidence. If anything, we want to build it up, right? But saying that, like the should and whatever, it's like, if there's one thing I wish I could change, it would be that. And if that actually is what kept me from doing this for 17 years, because I always landed on my Spanish just isn't good enough. And in the end, they're going to get me for that. And now, if people say, well, don't you think it's important? Of course I think it's important. And my kids are in private school so that they can learn how to speak Spanish. But I don't grade them on being a good human being or a good Latinas on whether or not they know a vocabulary word or know how to conjugate in the future tense. Like, it's simply not okay, because I meet people every day, thousands of people crying on my shoulder, really dealing with this for the very first time after they see my film, dealing with how much they believe it. And it's a lie. It's a lie that people have collapsed language and ability to speak a language with being good enough, like a good enough human being, good enough representative of a ethnic group. And I'm here to pull those two things apart. But if there's one thing I do more than anything, is I pull those two things apart. And so I was on the phone just this morning with an educator who's, actually an administrator for an entire county here in Colorado, because the seeds of this are in education. The seeds of this happen in the classroom and at home, and unfortunately with our own families, And like I said, it's the most well-intended comment that has the most painful consequences. So for anyone listening, please don't ever say that again to a child. They simply do not deserve it. Let them know that they're good enough as is.
Well, what you're talking about is something that I've heard from first generation Chinese.
Yes.
And from other ethnicities. And to be honest with you, it's something that I heard from folks who were coming over from Ireland, and we would say, "Oh yeah, I'm Irish," and they're like, "You're not Irish. I'm Irish. I'm from Ireland. You're not."
Yes.
Okay. Denise, please tell everybody where they can go to find out more about you and more about Project Enye.
Yeah, so they can go to my website and watch the movie for free, Project Enye, ProjectEnye.com. And you'll see a big picture of me and a place to put your email, and you'll be able to watch the film. The only thing I'll say is bring tissues, and also it has a happy ending. So
wonderful. We've had a great time speaking to the filmmaker of Being Eñye, Denise Soler Cox. Hey, Denise, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. I'm so happy.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Susan Fletcher. She'll be celebrating her historical nonfiction picture book. It's called A Bear Far From Home. That's the next episode of the podcast. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we're going to start by thanking our guest, Denise Soler Cox. Please be sure to check out Being Eñye. Also want to thank our sponsors, Dr. Patty Michelle. Be sure to check out her middle grade novel, The Antidotes Pollution Solution. And also Libby Kisner. Please be sure to check out Dear Libby, will you answer my questions about friendship? Also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Mirabella Q. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.